right, I'm gonna start up a couple things as we get started. Uh, wasn't the best night of my life last night, health-wise. I just felt funky all night. So we're gonna have lab in both classes this afternoon. All right, I was gonna talk in Android. I'm just not going to. All right. Um, the other thing too is that nice, wonderful version that I told you about of Camtasia that I have. This morning I came in here and did a tape for an hour, and I got done, and it gave me the first 30 seconds of it when I do my preview, and the rest was gone. It still said the size was huge, 614 meg. I'm sorry, I have a hard time believing to say this is Jeff Scott of Blackhawk Technical College. That took up 614 meg. So I don't know what happened to it, but that's all that plays. So I've got to go back and retape that. All right. As always, there is a folder out there with today's date on it, and it's got the material for Chapter 6, so it's right here. So you can grab that folder, and the only one that you really need to copy over into your HT docs is the CH06 folder. All right? But it's all right there if you care. I also put a bunch of articles out there. Some of them are manual pages, some of them are articles about abstract classes and about type hinting and traits and namespaces, which are the main topics or the main focus of this particular chapter. So we'll talk about all of that today. All right. And again, so we're in chapter 5, and we're talking about advanced OOP today. I'm sorry, chapter 6, more advanced OOP. So we've done chapter 1 through 5. We're going to do 6 today, more advanced OOP. All right, again, the plan is next Tuesday to go over chapter 7, design patterns, next Thursday. And if you're not going to be here Thursday, you're not going to for a week from today, but please make sure you watch that lecture, because that lecture is going to be on PHP data objects, amongst other things. But that's a really important topic, because the database stuff that we did in PHP, all we've done so far has been all MySQL oriented. In other words, using MySQL I_connect, all that stuff, that won't work if you're trying to connect to an Oracle database or if you're trying to connect to an SQL Server database. It only works with MySQL. So when we get to PDO, we find out how to be able to use PHP databases with other relational database management systems and with comma-separated variable files and with spreadsheets, etc. So that'll be a week from today. Then also, please remember, in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be going over chapter 9, and it's a big chapter. It's building an entire content management system, or CMS, with OOP. And the reason I just want to mention this real quickly to you is some of you have talked to me and said you've got a good plan, you know what you're going to be doing for your project, etc. Some people have said, well, I kind of know what I want to do, but I'm waiting to get some instructions from you. Kelly and I were talking as he came in this morning, and one of the things that I told him was, all I'm looking for is, I don't care if if you say, like he said he wants to build a website, and I said that's fine. All right, and he said I kind of want to go back to my roots and do a lot with HTML, HTML5, CSS, CSS3. I said that's fine too, but it can't be just HTML. And he said, oh no, I'm going to put it like a PHP wrapper, then it's good. And I'm not saying this is the case, but let's just say Mark says, I like Android, and I've got an idea. It's going to be simple, but I want to develop my own game. That'd be fine. You see what I'm saying? So it runs the gamut as far as what you want to do. So I will have something, but you'll be probably amazed that when I write up the thing, I'll write it up right before class, and it'll be a paragraph or two. And what you're going to be responsible for then is when and I'd like to give that to you hopefully next week, you'll have 2 weeks' time. You'll have to write like you did for the Joomla class. I got to watch when I say Joomla, because then Travis starts making faces. But with the Joomla class, that's why he's sitting over there. Yeah. Remember, I just gave you that real simple write-up and asked you what you were going to do your project on. This one's going to be similar to that. All right? And you'll have 2 weeks to, after I assign that to figure out what you're going to do for your project and tell me. All right? And again, I'm going to do a spreadsheet on turtles. Okay, as an example, or not a spreadsheet. I'm going to do a website on turtles, and it's going to use ASP.NET. All right, something like that, and maybe just mock up a little bit about what it's going to be about. You can change it as it goes on. Zach talked to me, the other Zach M. talked to me the other day about this. And his dad, I guess, owns a company, I think, that does class design or something. And he wants Zach to build him a website. And he was talking to me about it. And I said, well, that's fine. It sounds really good. And he said, oh, yeah, and I want to put this in it, and I want to put this in it. And then he started talking about putting in an entire e-commerce site for him. And I said, just don't let what you're doing for one class overwhelm what you're doing in your life and in your other classes. Ideally, it's supposed to supplement what you're doing in the other classes. That's why I mentioned if you wanted to create a game in iOS or you wanted to create a game in Android, that's cool because you got an Android class you're taking, all right? So, or an iOS class you're taking. So that kind of an idea. All right. So, more advanced OOP today. That's what we're talking about right now. So if you notice in here again, abstract classes and methods, interfaces, traits, type hinting, namespaces, and review and pursue. Now, if you look up on the screen here, first thing we've got are abstract classes and methods. You should know what those are already. We're going to go over them again, but you should know what they are. Interfaces, you should know what those are because we've done them in Java. All right? Namespaces, you actually do know what those are. That's like when you use a using statement in .NET or an import statement in Java. So you know what those are. What's new are traits and type hinting. So we'll talk about both of those. Again, as I mentioned to you earlier, I've got articles and stuff out there about each one of these if you want a little bit more information. But again, some of these, like where it says object interfaces and class abstraction, those are just manual pages that I took and I put them out here. I don't have a URL list because every article at the top of it has got the URL that I took it from. All right, so you can see all that stuff, again, if you have an interest in that. All right, so it says the previous chapter explored some advanced OOP concepts, mainly inheritance. This one talks about this other stuff that's over here. All right, and the author says some of this is kind of window dressing. You can be a successful programmer in PHP and probably very rarely use things like traits. But I think Ullman wanted to mention this stuff just so at least you were exposed to it. All right. So the first thing that he gets into here, starting on page 184, are abstract classes and methods. All right. Couple things. If you look up on the screen at what's in blue, remember that in Java? Because I did this with the first year people yesterday. Remember in Java where you do something like this, you create a class and you say equals new followed by a class, but if you tried to echo it, you'd get a really weird number, and that was the number in memory where that class was located. So one of the things that we did in Java, in first semester Java, is we learned how to overwrite the toString method. I don't know if you remember that or not, all right, but you can do the same thing in PHP. You can overwrite the toString method to make it do whatever you want it to do. So again, I'm not sure what you'd get if you did this. All right, we could just mock up a little PHP program and put it in. But it's whatever it is, it's going to be an address or something like that. It won't be typically what you want it to have. In fact, what I'll do, I don't know if it'll even let me do this, but I'm going to try it anyway. Nope, doesn't let me copy. So I'll write it up during the break and we'll see if it does anything special. All right. Abstract classes are classes you never plan on instantiating directly. An abstract class is basically, it's a class that other classes use to extend from. So when you put the word abstract before a class name, you cannot new that class. You can't create an existence or an object of that type of class. All right? And when you put an abstract class in, a lot of times you'll put in something like this. Can somebody tell me what that means? Literally what that means. Not what abstract means or functions or method names, but if you put that into an abstract class, what does that mean? See, we all remember abstract classes from our Java days. That means that any class that extends this class right here has to implement that method. That's all it means. It's a contract. So if you put an abstract method into a class, the class must be made an abstract class. But you can have either abstract methods in classes, all right, or you can have non-abstract methods in classes. You can have regular methods in there if you want to do that. But again, they give you some stuff here, and what they tell you is this is a good example. They say, hey, remember this? Remember when we did the pet class? And we looked at that last example, I think it was Robbie or something like that, and we created an object of type pet, and I said that was actually kind of stupid because pet is too generic. All right? So what we really should have done, and what he should have done in the last chapter, is he should have made pet an abstract class. And then dog could have extended pet, so could cat, so could turtle, so could ferret, so, you know, whatever. Whatever you have for a pet could extend it then. That would have been a better idea. I think he showed it to you the way he showed it to you because he just wanted to get inheritance in and then start talking about abstract classes in the next chapter. So what he gets into in this chapter, if you look at the picture here, it's on the bottom of page 185 in your book also. He said in the last chapter, or chapter 4, we created this rectangle class. This rectangle class had width, it had height, all right, and it had some other stuff. But really when you think about what is a rectangle is a type of shape. Just like a triangle is a type of shape, just like a circle is a type of shape, and there's plenty of other ones. All right? So what he's going to do here is he's going to create an abstract class called shape. All right? And there's no, when you create an abstract class, you're not going to put any variables in it. All right? It's just basically going to be methods. So he puts in these two methods, get area and get perimeter. So this get area and this get perimeter right here are probably going to be written just like this. All right, abstract function, get area, abstract function, get perimeter. You don't have to write them like that, but a lot of times that's what you will do. That means that when you get down into the rectangle class, a rectangle class will have to override or write its own version of get area and get perimeter. So will the triangle, so will the circle. And think about it. Doesn't that make sense? Because you figure out the area and the perimeter different for different shapes. All right? Yeah. No, no. If rectangle extends shape, all right, and if shape defines get area and get perimeter, if it puts them in there, then every class that extends it must put in a get area and a get perimeter, but they can be different as far as what's inside of the curly braces. No, what this is saying is this is a contract, and what this says is, hey, if what I have here is an abstract class that's called shape. It's got two different methods in it. If you want to extend from my abstract shape class, then you have to have your own version of get area and get perimeter in your class, and neither one of them can require any parameters because what you have in here for the method signature, that has to be the same here and here and here. Did I answer your question? Yes, exactly. Yes. But what it allows you to do is it allows you to go and build different subclasses off of the same main class, and at least some of the methods can be in common. I don't mean the stuff that's in there, but the naming of the methods can be in common. Now, because if you didn't do it like this, let's say that you didn't use this one at all, so that you don't even have a shape. All right, you could write your own get area, your own get perimeter, etc. But this get area might be called get area. That one might be called get the area. That one might be called something else. You know, get surface area or whatever. So what you're doing is you're saying the idea that you always want to do when you start to build an object-oriented hierarchy like they're showing here is you always want to go from more general to more specific. So this just says get area. For what? Doesn't matter. Some shape. And then when you get down here, all right, so let's assume, for example, that, you know, under triangle, you wanted isosceles triangle, all right, as an example. And then that down here, that could have its own get area and its own get perimeter that could be different from the triangles get area and get perimeter. All right? That's about the best I can give you. Okay, so he comes in here, and here's his abstract. It's called shape.php, and it's on, that's the whole file right here. And if we stripped out the comments, all right, it's line 9, and it's line 14, and it's line 17, and it's line 19. So really, again, virtually everything that I'm showing you right here, all that is just comments. Just forget that, for now, forget it even exists. We need this, abstract class shape, all right? And we're going to have an abstract protected function called getArea, and another one that's called getPerimeter. And we've got our ending curly. That's really the whole class. So again, any class that extends shape must have its own method in there that's called getArea, and it must have a method called getPerimeter, and then whatever else it wants to have. And what goes in the curlies for get, between the, for the getPerimeter and the getArea can be totally different, and it should be totally different. Right. And Mark, I don't know if this helps, but you kind of look at it this way. Let's say that, okay, this class that's up here, let's assume, all right, that for lack of better words, and this isn't going to be a great example, but hopefully you'll hammer it home a little bit. Okay, let's say where we've got abstract class shape here. Let's say that's, I'm just going to call that parent, so that's me, okay? And instead of these right here, these are my 3 kids, okay? And so what I'm saying is rather than get area and get perimeter, I'm going to define 2 abstract methods. One's called get a job, and the other one's called get the hell out of my house. All right, you understand? All right, so so what I'm saying is that with all 3 of these kids, they will now be responsible for getting a job. But the job for each one of them can be different. The amount they make can be different. How they get the job can be different. One of them can decide, well, get the hell out of the house. Yeah, I'll do it when you're dead. Then I'm going to walk out of the house. Another one can say, fine, I'm gone now. See what I'm saying? So they all will have to do that, but the way in which they do it can be different for each one of them, and will be. All right. But when you're doing this, when you're really starting to go through object-oriented design, you're going to have an object-oriented hierarchy that can literally be scores of levels deep, and you're going from more and more general to more and more specific. Yeah, and up here, what we're saying up here is all that shape has is we're saying that every single shape that you create has to have an area and has to have a perimeter. That's what we're saying with what you see up here. That's what we're saying. It's not a call. No, we're saying they all must have a method called that. Yes. But again, how it's going to be defined inside of each class will be different. That's one of the things that makes them a class. All right. So we've got that, and then we've got over here, this is the triangle. All right. So if you look in here, the key line is this one, and this should look familiar to you because it looks a lot. This looks a lot like the way we did it in Java. Class followed by the class name extends. So class child extends parent. All right. So this has got a couple variables here. These 2 variables, $_sides and $_perimeter, they're not known from shape. Shape doesn't know that they even exist. It doesn't care. But if you look, and there's the constructor. All right. And what's the key thing is this. Now, again, this is what I'm getting to. You have to have that method in there because the parent had a function header for get area, right? Didn't shape have that? So I need to do one in here. And it also had one for get perimeter. But if I were to go and write, go back to my triangle class that we had earlier, and I extended shape, I'd have to, again, add a get area and a get perimeter. It wouldn't be done this way because you don't find the area and the perimeter for a rectangle the same way you do for a triangle. All right. And that's what he explains in here. So he goes through it and he says, I don't even remember from geometry days how to do this, but I kind of figured it out, which means to me that he Googled it. All right, and then he put it into PHP code, and that's what he's showing there. But again, the key thing here is we come in and we run this. Now, if you notice, if you look up on the screen here, okay, if I go in here and run all this stuff, well, the first thing we did was shape. That doesn't do anything. Why doesn't it do anything? You're on the right track. The idea is it's abstract, so you never create an object of its type. All right? So notice when I come in and do triangle. It says error class shape not found. What? It's like, yeah, it was in there, because look. Class triangle extend shape. But that's not the file that we use to run this. We actually have to run the abstract one, because what is that going to do? That'll load for us shape and triangle, and it'll set up the 3 triangle sides, then it'll create a new triangle. Because triangle right now is not instantiating an object. And that's why we're getting that error message. So notice if I run this, if I go and run abstract, there it is. With sides of 5, 10, and 13, there's the area, there's the perimeter. All right, and you'll notice if I double each one of these, so if I come back here for triangle, for abstract, and I change them from 5, 10, and 13 to let's make them 15, 30, and 45. All right, and then come back and run this again. Now, it says that the area is 0, and that's because of a weird rule in there, that one of those triangular rules that the sum of any 2 sides has got to be greater than the 3rd side or whatever, and I didn't follow that rule. All right, so that's a math rule. That isn't something that I did. All right, but if I go back and change it back to the way it was before, 5, 10, and 13, and try to come up with something that's at least close, I don't know. And because I even went out and looked at an example of this, but if I give it back to the way it was and run it, now I'm meeting all of the criteria, so it'll figure out the area for me. All right, and if it can't, it's just going to set the area to 0. And what's this? What's the perimeter? 5 plus 10 plus 13. All right. And again, he explains how he's creating the class. He explains how to use the class. He explains basically everything that's in here. All right. Then let's jump into interfaces. Remember this from the days of Java? Okay, if I was going to create a class and I said public class child extends parent. Okay, if I wanted to have an interface in there, what word do I use in Java? Anybody remember? Not all at once. Extends is what you use. All right, extends, that's what you use for inheritance. What word do I put over here for interfaces? How about this one? Remember that when you implemented an interface? And what's an interface? I showed you this picture on the board the other day that you cannot do this. I can't do this in PHP or Java or in a lot of other languages, or C# for that example, for that matter. If I've got a class here called A and another class called B, and I want a new class here called C, I can't do this. Why? And actually, that's the wrong way. I really should show it like this. Why can't I do that? Because you can't have multiple inheritance. So if I want to be able to do that, instead of writing these as classes, if I needed them both, and let's say there was yet another class over here that was called parent. So that's parent and that's child. And I really just want to do that one. That's the one I want to do. But I still want to be able to use these. Then I don't make them classes. I make them interfaces. All right? So I can extend that and implement those. So that as close, using interfaces is as close as any language allows you to get to doing multiple inheritance. All right, and you notice it uses the same word, implements. Same exact word that we used when we were working on this in Java. All right. So it says interfaces identify the functionality that methods defined by a class must use. And in many ways, they're similar to one another. And they show you this on the bottom of 191. I don't want to read to you. They tell you the difference between these. They say it may be subtle, but there is a difference. All right. And he talks about there what an abstract class is, and there what an interface is. Here's a key way to look at it. This kind of, and you'll see this in a lot of books. Inheritance is a relationship. So for instance, if what I have up there, if I have a parent that's called bank account and a child that's called checking account, a checking account is a bank account. Makes sense, right? All right. On the other hand, with an interface, you don't have an is-a relationship. As it says there, it says it has the same behaviors as relationship. All right. So what he does in here is he creates an interface file. It's just a PHP file, and he calls it iCrud. How about this? Without not Mike W. One of the rest of you. What does that stand for? What does CRUD stand for? Now you should know this. These are kinds of questions you might be asked at an interview. I'm not making that up. You know, don't mean, well, it's another word for crummy. No, that's not what I mean here by CRUD. It's an acronym. It's create, read, update, delete. All right. It's basically the things that you can typically do in a relational or in a database management system. All right. So he comes in here and he creates an interface that's going to have 4 methods in it. It's going to have one that's called create, one that's called read, one that's called update, one that's called delete. You take those first letters, and it's CRUD. All right. You'll notice that create will require something to be passed in, so will update. Read and delete will not require anything to be passed in. All right. So they go and they implement the different methods in here. And then they come back to one of their classes and they say, okay, so if I come in here now and say this, class user implements CRUD. Now I can come in and I can say $this, pointing to, and I can use create, and I can use read, and I can use update, and I can use delete. So as it says, by implementing the iCrud interface, you're forced to have those different methods in there. You have no choice. And why would you do that? Well, you would typically do it, let's say that we were all working on a project together. And Mark went and wrote these really generic, cool database functions. All right? And I wanted to use them. I could implement them basically as an interface then. All right? And Teresa wrote some really cool graphics functions, and I want those too. All right? So I can implement Mark's cool database functions, comma, Teresa's cool graphics functions, comma, and then whatever. So you can implement as many interfaces as you want. So one big difference, just so you know, one big difference in PHP. Technically in PHP, you don't have to have a parent. You can just create a class. It doesn't have to extend anything. For Java, it always extends something, even if it's just object. All right. So that's really, I should say, is one thing. That's a big thing. And both classes, both languages rather, both PHP and Java allow you to only have single inheritance, but multiple interfaces. All right. The example he gives in here is kind of a screwy one. So I mean, all he does is he comes through here and he changes the person's username from Trout to Troutster. He does that. He does the create, and he gives them an ID of 45E0E3883EC8F. And then he gives them a username of Trout. Then he goes in and he calls the update, and he changes it from Trout to Troutster, just to show you that you can do it. Now, it may not seem like it to you, and you might say, well, geez, I forgot all that stuff. But it was mainly review. What's next, when they start talking about here on page 197 with traits, that's new. Not only is traits new to PHP, it's new to PHP 5.4. And I'm going to digress for a second and tell you this. What I'm about to tell you, you'll either zone out and not hear it anyway, or maybe it'll matter to you, maybe it won't. But when you go on and graduate from here and you're going for a job, let's just assume any one of you goes for a job as a PHP programmer. All right? I'm actually PHP certified. I went through the Zen training and got myself certified, but that was PHP 5.3. Because back in 2010 when I got certified, that was the latest and greatest. PHP 5.4 didn't change much. Now, from what I heard, they were going to make 6. In fact, they were going to make 6 in 2010 when I was at San Diego for this training. That's all they talked about. Now they're talking about not even having a PHP 6 and jumping all the way to PHP 7. All right? And kind of like with Windows, there was what? There was Windows, there was, Vista and everything else, and it was Windows 7, then it was Windows 8. I don't think there ever was a Windows 9. It just jumped right to 10. Sometimes people do that, though, and sometimes, for lack of better words, it's done for effect. All right? And all I'm telling you is right now, and you've seen this before, this is something I showed you back in day one of PHP. Again, hopefully you remember that back from the days when we went through this stuff. All right, so I'm going to save this. I'm going to save it right out there, and I'm just going to call it test.php. All right, and again, I'm not trying to waste your time here, but I want to go back here, refresh, and there's test. All right, you've seen this already, but the key thing is someplace in here, right there. See that? That's the version that we're using with XAMPP right now. If that was below 5.4, everything that's discussed on 197, 198, 199, 200, 201, 202, in the first half of 203 wouldn't apply. And there are a lot of shops out there that are still running older versions of PHP. There are still shops out there that are running PHP back in version 4. Because back in version 4 of PHP, you could do a lot of cheating things you can't do today. All right? If I told you what they were, you'd be like, oh, let's go back and get 4 here, because it allowed you to do some really sloppy programming. All right, you can't do that anymore. Come version 5, they cleaned it up. So it says traits are used to solve a problem in PHP, and kind of look at it this way. In many ways, it's like implementation. It's like the implements. It's like implementing an interface in many ways. All right, but they go through it on the next page, a couple pages up. I'll jump back again, but I want to show you this. I thought this was a decent explanation. I'm not saying it was great or anything, but it was pretty good. Page 200 here. It says traits and interfaces seem the same, but they're two effectively opposite approaches. An interface enforces stricter programming because an interface is a contract. So if I agree to implement the interface, then everything I put in the interface must be implemented in my class. That's what it's saying. But a trait, as it says, makes methods available to a class that the class itself does not define. So in other words, it extends a class, all right, but not with another class, by just giving it some methods. And if you say, I sort of get that, but why would you want to do that instead of another? You don't have to. This is a new type of thing that's recently been added to the language. All right, and some of the stuff I tried to put in here, and I don't remember exactly what they were, but there's the thing with traits. A small introduction to traits. This is the manual page and how to use them. But this small introduction was pretty short, 3 or 4 pages, and they were trying to explain in here why you'd want to use them. And notice, the concept of traits is actually quite old, and there were similar approaches until the PHP version was created. It says, while not exactly what we call a trait, its origins go back to the 80s, and they give you some examples of it. So, what is a trait? It's essentially a group of pure methods that serve as a building block for classes, a primitive unit of code reuse. So what's the difference between that and an interface? Not really a whole heck of a lot. But an interface looks more like another class, all right, whereas a trait is more like just a collection of methods. That's the best definition I can give you. And if you say, well, maybe that was the best, but it stunk. Okay, then it stunk. So they go through this, and again, if we go back and run this, I just want to show you from here that if I come back here, what they use for this example is they bring this file that's called tdebug.php, and that's where they define everything. So that's it right here. But notice if I run it, it doesn't show anything because it's not instantiating anything. All right? So then they come in and they say, oh, the rectangle will use it. So if I bring up the rectangle, it gives me an error. It says tdebug not found because that's not the file that you run either. The one that you run is trait.php. All right? Now, what's in here may not make a whole lot of sense to you, except that if I went and ran this trait file on every single one of my classes, there would be a way to get all this documentation for my classes. In other words, what I'm telling the trait's telling it to do is two things. Dump out every single attribute that I have in the class, its name and its value, and dump out the name of every method that I have in the class. So this is the kind of thing that you could use. For example, I could use this and throw this stuff into a database or someplace else and use this for some of my external documentation if I wanted to do that. And that's kind of what Ullman is showing in here. All right. Then he gets into type hinting. And I just want to mention this to you. I think hopefully this will go very quickly because this should make sense to everybody. Okay. So I'm literally going to come in here, and I don't normally do that in this class, but I'm going to come in here and I'm going to write some real quick down and dirty little Java. All right. All right. So if I come through here and I type in as an example, so I'd have to put my public, static, void, main, string, bracket, bracket, args. Again, you might remember that, you might not. So in here, I'm going to put in a variable, int age equal 21. All right, now I want to call something from here. I want to call another method. Okay, so I want to call birthday. All right, and I'm going to pass in age. Okay, and then I come in here and I write this. I'm going to make a mistake in here, and I want you to tell me what the mistake is. In fact, I'll do this. Again, I'm putting a mistake in here, and I want you to tell me what this is, what the mistake is. Okay, there's a mistake in there. Can somebody tell me what the mistake is? Come on, you should know this stuff. It really and truly isn't hard. It isn't. What? What? No. 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 I'll give you a hint. It's look at this, and look at this, and look at this. What am I doing here? What am I doing right there? I understand it. What I'm saying in English. What am I doing right there? I'm calling a method. Would you agree with that? All right. I'm passing in a parameter. Okay. What am I not doing here? That's right. So that will fail. All right. And what if I just do this? Now will it work? Okay. No, that's okay. Now it'll work, correct? So in other words, if I came out right here and typed in system.out.println and I put in here age.toString, probably would work without the toString, but I'll just put it in there anyway. All right, that's going to print out 21. If I do the same thing right here, it should print out 22, correct? Does that make sense to everybody? Because all I'm telling it to do, I'll cut this down a bit, there. So it's 21, I'm printing it out, it should print out 21. Now I'm saying it's equal to this, which is going to return one more than that, which should make it 22, and now I'm printing out 22. All right. Now, let's looking at that. I'm going to grab, in fact, I'll just do it like this. Okay. So I'm going to come in here, and for right now, I'm not worrying about object-oriented or anything, but I just want to say this. So let's assume in here that I have a function in here that we're just going to call function main. Okay, and not going to require anything. I'm going to say $age equal 21 echo $age. I could use print in there also. Now I'm saying $age equals birthday, and I'm going to pass it in $age, and now I want to echo it out again. So what I'm trying to do is the same thing I was doing in Java, I want to do it in PHP. So now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say function birthday, and I can just say $A, for example, for age. I'm asking you now, is that doing the same thing in PHP? Should be. What don't I put here that I had for the Java? What's not there? No. Yes. Because when you work with simple variables like this, you can't do what's called type hint. Okay? The reason I'm telling you that is, imagine in here that I had a whole bunch of code. And let's say this was object-oriented. And instead of age, I was creating an employee. And I set up the employee's height, their weight, their age, all this stuff. And in here, I was passing in employee. All right, like that. Okay? And it was of type employee. What I can do, if it's an object that I'm passing, then I can come in here and I can do this. That's a type hint. See what I'm saying? What it's kind of doing is it's giving some of the power you have with a more structured language like Java, and it's giving it to PHP. Because PHP inherently doesn't have that ability. So that's what they talk about in the next section with type hinting. That's what it is. So with the example that they give, is they say, okay, what we want to do is we want to create a class that's called employee. I'm sorry, a class that's called department first, right there. And we're going to have maybe an employee class later, but we've got this department class. It's got a name, it's got employees, it's got a constructor, and now notice there's the type hint. And when I showed it to you, there was no $sign there, so that should have been off of there. Sorry. See that? What's in blue? That's kind of like how you do it in a language like Java. But a type hint, basically what that says is, if I try calling add employee, it expects that whatever I'm passing in is of type employee. So if I pass it in something that's not of type employee, I'm going to get an error message. In a nutshell, that's type hinting. And they mention here in the book, on page 203, type hinting is the programming act of indicating what type of value is expected. It doesn't play much of a role in procedural PHP because whatever you put here when you type hint like this, you can't do this in PHP, what I'm about to show you. You couldn't change that, for example, to this. All right? Can somebody tell me why can't you do that? Why can't I say int? Why can't I do that in PHP? Because there is no int data type in PHP. So what you put in here when you type hint is the name of a class, and it's a class you created. So it does exist. Right? That's why it works. And the only thing about it is it's done as a way to try to make sure that what you pass into a program is what should be passed. All right. Now, maybe I'm going to just leave it at this and just say one more thing, and maybe this will help or maybe it'll hurt. I don't have it up right now, and I don't have the Mac in here. But you know, when we've been working on the Macs, and we've been sitting there, we've been trying to go and wire up interfaces. Everybody with me? All right. And you come in there, and you want to wire up a button. Okay, so you go and you control click and you drag that up, etc. And we go in there and we name the button. You may or may not remember. It might say underneath that, it might say UI button, or it might say any object. And if it says any object and you click that down arrow, it shows UI button. All right, because that language allows you to do almost whatever you want. But if you want to be more strict, you don't want to say any object, you change it to UI button. Why would you change a click event? Why would you change something from any object to UI button? Before you answer, just think about it. Any object means what? Anything, right? Wouldn't there possibly be some things in whatever the language is, but in this case Swift, you wouldn't want to be able to click on and have something happen? What if I just clicked on a blank spot on the screen? I wouldn't necessarily want anything to happen, would I? But by changing it from any object to UI button, what you're saying is, this is only going to work for a button. That's kind of what type hinting is doing. It's saying that's only going to work if you pass in a parameter of this type. So if it's expecting a parameter of type employee, and I pass in a parameter of type department, which isn't set up the same way as employee, I'm going to get an error message. Or if I try to pass in an int or a float or whatever, I'm going to get an error message. And that's what he tries to mention here on these pages. All right, and he shows you how you can add employees into your department. Again, I think that's probably about enough said. And the last thing that's discussed in the chapter, the last 5 or 6 pages, talks about namespaces. And again, I've mentioned this to you already, that if this was, I can't go back and revert it, I guess, but if this was a Java program, as an example, if it was, quite often at the top we'd say, rather than just public class test and then putting that in here, what we typically have at the top would be something like this. All right, hopefully you remember this from the stuff that we've been doing now on Android and from last semester. So if I said this, and then later I said this, all right, what are these things doing? I'm asking you, what are those things doing? Let's start with this one. What is this doing? Well, you're on the right track. If you remember, when we created a package, we put all our files underneath that package, correct? So what that says is, everything that comes after it is part of this package. All right, kind of what you were saying. But you get the idea? And what does this say? What does that say? And again, you're on the right track because it's almost saying the same thing. What this is saying is, under the Java AWT package, grab everything that's directly underneath that and make that accessible in here. So what we're doing when we're using an import statement is we're namespacing. We're telling it where something lives, and we're making that available to our program. And what Ullman gets into in the last few pages of the chapter is he says you can do the same thing in PHP. But instead of having a package, it's a namespace. And the reason that you set up packages, namespaces, etc., is you don't want to have what are called collisions. All right? Sometimes when you have namespaces, the stuff that you put in there, you've got to use the same kind of thing that we looked at here. So if I want to go and create myself, for example, if I want to create myself a function, and let's say I want to create one that's called square root, but it's my function. All right? I might be able to do something like, as an example, if I wanted to invoke my own function, something like that, as opposed to saying, this is saying, go out and grab the one that PHP gave you. This says, go to that namespace, find the one that's in there that's been redefined, and call that. You understand the difference? All right. If I just went in my program and tried, if I remove that, and that should have been square root, not pound. Sorry. No, but I'm trying to show you what's going on. All right. If you have your stuff housed in that namespace, all right, you'll be able to use it either directly or by using a variant of what I just showed you right here. Not the edu.blackhawk, but all we're trying to do is we're trying to say, hey, if we overwrite something that's a system thing, or let's say that you and I are writing a program together, all right, and we're going to combine all of our stuff when we get done. And you write this really super cool function that's called test the database, and it does all this really cool stuff. Well, unknown to you, I write a super cool function that's called test the database that's totally different. We want to make sure that if I want to call yours, I'm able to by using the namespace. And if you want to call mine, you're able to by using the namespace. It's another way, because all the packages, really, all this is it says you're creating a folder structure. That's really what you're doing. And that's what this is doing too. We want the stuff that falls immediately under this folder to be available in our program. And he talks about that in here. And he says, you don't want to have conflicts. So he says there are... Yes. What typically what you're going to have to do then is, if you want to use something that I've defined in here, all right, you're going to have to either include the namespace or maybe say some namespace dot for it to be able to find it. Yeah. Yeah. There's different ways in which this can be done. And I'm not trying to not answer your question, but and it sounds really crummy to say it depends, but it does on how you've implemented. That's why when I came in here, all right, I've got this series. I thought it was pretty well done, and they're short articles, like 5 pages, or 4 pages, 3 pages, and 3 pages. So if you want a much better introduction to this than I just gave you, just go and take a look at that. All right. Again, these are advanced concepts. Do I expect you to use those? No, I expect you to at least know what they are. Again, Mark goes in for there's requiring that. And this is where it comes into. There are ways that you can shorten that, but this kind of goes back to what Kelly talked about. All right? And if you look at that article, it'll give you some hints, so to speak, on how to get started with it. And again, it's not, I don't know if Mike W., if you agree with me on this or not. It depends on, as I know you've interviewed at enough places, and it depends on the place. All right? I've gone to interviews at places where literally we don't even talk about work. They want to know about me. They want to know what I like, what I don't like, what my kids are like, and I've gone to interviews like that. I've gone to other ones where you would think, oh my God, you're asking me questions, and if I say something wrong, you're going to drop me into a flaming pit. And the questions they ask are unbelievably technical. And other times they'll give you scenarios. I know you said that you had that with the last interview you went to. They'll either show you code, or they'll give you a scenario and they'll say, how would you solve this? Now, I'm not saying that if you get one, that they're going to sit there and say, okay, create a PHP namespace and you're going to know how to do it. I don't mean that. But at a minimum, if somebody asks you what a PHP namespace is, you should be able to answer it. All right, there are a lot of articles out there. In fact, there's a lot of them out there on Code Project that they have articles like ASP.NET questions and answers. And literally, if you print out that document, it's 40 or 50 pages long. And he starts with real simple questions, and he gives you an answer, and he goes through and gives you an example, and it gets to really complex stuff. There are other things out there, the same kind of thing for PHP. And the reason I'm telling you this, because I'm done, but the reason I'm telling you this, Steve Helsell, if you remember Steve from last year, he's had a bunch of different jobs since he's graduated. And kind of like what Mike has done, a couple of the jobs that he's had have been temporary jobs. So he's had them for a few months, and then the job kind of goes away. Well, he sent me an email last week, and he said he was interviewing, and he didn't let me know how it went, but I think it was Monday this week, for a C# job. But they asked for some other stuff too. And he said, can you give me some advice? I tend to either go into an interview and I'm so over-prepared it's ridiculous, or I'm so under-prepared it's ridiculous. And he said, I'm looking for a medium type of thing. And I wrote back and basically told him what I just told you. Depends on the place you go to. All right? When I went and interviewed at AT&T in the morning, my interview, the guy asked me about what I knew about programming. And they programmed in C, so I didn't know the language, but he asked me different programmatic questions. Literally in the afternoon, and I'm not making this up, the guy who programmed, or the guy who interviewed me, it was for an operating system group. He talked to me about Unix and about his life. And he maybe asked me 2 questions in 2 hours. Other than that, was him talking 99% of the time. How do you prepare for that? You really can't. And the guy in the morning, I was somewhat prepared. Study your resume, and you remember, anything that you put on that resume, you should be willing and able and capable of talking about. All right, so don't list obscure classes if you don't remember what the heck you did in them. I've done that. You don't want to do that kind of stuff. All right, so again, next class we'll go over Chapter 7, which is on design patterns, next Tuesday. And next Thursday, which is like the 5th, we'll be going over Chapter 8. All right, and that's on using PHP built-in classes, and we'll talk about PDOs, PHP data objects.